S'il y a besoin de traduction, quelqu'un veut traduire? Tu veux traduire? Hein? Non, sinon on peut plus.
No, Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So, permission of Maharaj, Amida Prabhu, all the Vaishnavas, and the devotees. We tried to speak something on the Bhagavatam today. So I read today's verse yesterday. And Srila Prabhupada's purport is very, very interesting. So I thought I would do a little presentation covering some of the points that Prabhupada mentions in the purport. And perhaps Prabhupada's purport is there's so much there that maybe we can do over 2 days, today and tomorrow. Let's see how it goes. So yeah, we'll do as normal. We'll do the verse together, and then we'll go into the presentation. So if everyone can repeat after me. Kaye balistasya mahavibhute Sahart vigacharya sadasya eta Dadarsha vishvam trigunan gunatmake Bhutendriyarthasya jiva yuktam Kaye balistasya mahavibhute Sahart vigacharya sadasya etad Dadarsha vishvam trigunam gunatmake Bhutendriyarthasya jiva yuktam Kaye balistasya mahavibhute Sahart vigacharya sadasya etad Dadarsha vishvam trigunam gunatmake Bhutendriyarthasya jiva yuktam Balistasya mahavibhute
Darsha Vishwam Trigunam Gunatmake Tendriyarthasya Jiva Yuktam Balistasya Mahavibhute
Balistasya mahavibhute
Sahabrigacharya Sudaya Eta Dadarsha Vishwam Trigunam Gunatmake Utendriyarthasya Jiva Yuktam
Kaye balistasya mahavibhute Balistasya mahavibhute Sahat vigacharya sadasya Tadarsha vishvam trigunam gunatmake Bhutendriyarthasya jiva yuktam Mataji's. Balistasya mahavibhute Sahagriyachaya sadasya etat Dasha Vishwan Trigunan Gunatmake Bhutenyatra Sarajiva Yuktam Kaye Balistasya mahavibhute Sahagriyachaya sadasya etat Dasha Vishwan Trigunan Gunatmake Kaye, in the body, Bali, Maharaj Bali, Tasya, of the personality of Godhead, Mahavibhute, of that person who is equipped with all wonderful opulences, Saharitvikacharya Sadasya, with all the priests, acharyas and members of the Holy Assembly. Etat, this, Dadarsha, so, Vishvam, the whole universe, Trigunam, made of the three modes of material nature, Guna Atmake, and that which is the source of all such qualities, Bhuta, with all the gross material elements, Indriya, with the senses, Artha, with the sense objects, Ashaya, with mind, intelligence and false ego, Jiva Yuktam, with all the living entities. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Bali Maharaj, along with all the priests, acharyas and members of the assembly, observed the Supreme Personality of Godhead's universal body, which was full of 6 opulences. That body contained everything within the universe, including all the gross material elements, the senses, the sense objects, the mind, intelligence, and false ego, the various kinds of living entities, and the actions and reactions of the 3 modes of material nature. So Vamandev had come into the assembly, and now he had manifested his form, his huge form. And this very inconceivable point is now being explained, that they saw Vamandev, Bali Maharaj, and all the members of the assembly saw Vamandev, and at the same time they saw everything within Vamandev. So this is, as they would say, far out. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartate, Gita 10:8. Krishna is the origin of everything. Vasudeva sarvamiti, Gita 7:19. Krishna is everything. Matstani sarvabhutani nachaham teshva vastita. Gita 9:4. Everything rests in the body of the Lord, yet the Lord is not everywhere. Mayavadi philosophers think that since the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, has become everything, He has no separate existence. Their philosophy is called Advaita Vad. Actually, however, their philosophy is not correct. Here, Bali Maharaj was the seer of the Personality of Godhead's universal body, and that body was that which was seen. Thus, there is Dvaita Vad. There are always 2 entities, the seer and the seen. The seer is a part of the whole, but he is not equal to the whole. The part of the whole, the seer, is also one with the whole, but since he is but a part, he cannot be the complete whole at any time. This achintya, Bheda, Bheda, simultaneous oneness and difference, is the perfect philosophy propounded by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Prabhupada ki. Um, if right now we are within the building, right? So we are inside the building. So there may be someone standing outside of this building looking at the building, right? So either you're one of the two. Either you're inside the building and you're looking at everything inside the building, or you're outside the building and you're looking at the building. It can only be one or two. You can't do both, right? You can't say I'm inside the building and I'm simultaneously looking at the whole building. It's not possible. But that's what they perceived when they saw Vamandev. They saw that everything was within the body of the Lord. They saw everything, all the senses, all the elements, all the living entities. They saw it within the Supreme Lord. But at the same time, they saw that the Lord had his own body separate from everything. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, that's perfectly fine. Because this is Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. Mother Yashoda looked into Krishna's mouth and she saw everything, including herself. At the same time, she just saw Krishna as a beautiful, charming young boy simultaneously. How is it possible? How can you see yourself within something and then see that very thing separate from everything else? Imagine you're, I don't know, in the Goshala and you ring someone, like you ring Jyoti Prabhu. Well, he doesn't have a phone. But if he did have a phone. And you say, Jyoti Prabhu, where are you? And he says, I am in the building, but I am not in the building. You would think like, okay, is he okay? Like, has he had enough sleep? Like, either you're in the building or you're not. It's one of the two. This is completely inconceivable. In this purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about three philosophies: Advaitavad, Dvaitavad, and the Chintya Bheda Bheda Tattva Vad. And so what I thought we'd do today is just look at what are these philosophies, how do they fit together, and what was the progression of how these philosophies even came about. Why do these philosophies even exist in the first place? And then perhaps tomorrow, if we get time, Prabhupada makes this beautiful statement. He says, the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the perfect philosophy. So maybe we will tomorrow look at why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy is so amazing. Okay? So with your permission, we'll try to go through this today. And the way we'll do it is in terms of talking about these three philosophies, the way we'll try to present it is by giving you a history of what happened from the time of Krishna to the time of now, and what happened in between and how all of these different philosophies came about. Okay? So as I speak, if any question comes to your mind, just ask. You can put your hand up and ask, because otherwise, you don't want to lose the thread of what we're talking about. Okay? Do I have your permission to do this? Thank you. Okay, so Shastra explains that the spiritual world is Tripad Vibhuti and the material world is Ekapad Vibhuti. Material world is 1/4 of the creation, spiritual world is 3/4 of the creation. Of course, in one sense, the spiritual creation is infinite. So what's 1/4 of infinite is also like infinite. So in one sense, the manifestations of the Lord are immeasurable. But still, the spiritual world is the majority of the creation. And yes, Maharaj.
So put your hand up if you have a question.
Yes.
I'm probably going to answer them anyway. So does that mean the material world is measurable or immeasurable?
It's inconceivable. I mean, Prabhupada does say
90 degrees and 270 degrees just going in unlimited.
Srila Prabhupada mentions it's like mustard seeds in a bag. Like it's almost like there is an end to it, but according to our perception, there's no end to it. Like it would be difficult to measure where it ends. So I guess the answer to that is yes and no. Unless Maharaj, you can tell us the.
But you could take a point, center point, and have 90 degrees and 270 degrees just going on infinitely. So it is a quarter and it is 3/4.
Yeah.
Could see that. You understand?
No.
Now if you have a point, center point,
Okay.
compass, 90 degrees is 1/4,
Yeah,
270 degrees is 3/4, but they're just going on. And
Oh, I see. Okay.
1/4
As in like a pie.
creative potency.
Oh, okay, yeah. Like if you imagine a pie chart like that.
Yeah, unlimited pie.
Unlimited pie. Yes, that's Ramalila.
But maybe the material energy is measurable because it has an end. And the spiritual energy has no end.
Yeah.
Like it's limited, so it's measurable.
Yeah. But yeah, so that point is there as well, but in the sense that our perception of that is so huge, it's so beyond our scope that it may be measurable, but for us it's practically immeasurable because we don't have that kind of capacity. So, I mean, so that's the point I'm making, that it could be both. Anyway, somehow or other, we're trying to get back to the spiritual world. That's the main point here. I often mention this to people that they once did a survey to find out what are the most popular ways in which people relax. And you know the 4 top ways people relax? They watch a movie, they take intoxication, they go on holiday, or they go to sleep. These are the 4 top ways in which people relax. And as you hear those, you can see what the common element between them is, right? Can you see? Intoxication, sleep, go on holiday, or watch a movie. What do all 4 of those things have in common? They're an escape, isn't it? They're an escape. Because innate within every living entity is this sense that I have to escape the world. But none of these things provide a permanent escape because the movie ends, sleep comes to an end, the holiday ends, intoxication and its effects end, and then you're right back in the material world. Though there's a sense in which the Christian writer C.S. Lewis, he once said, if I find within myself a desire which no experience of this world can fulfill, then I must conclude I was made of a different world. So that's very nice. That's the point. So we're meant to go back to the spiritual world. So what Krishna does periodically is he comes down, or he sends his representatives down from the spiritual world to the material world. When Krishna comes from the spiritual world to the material world, what do we call that? An avatar. Yeah, ava means to come. Tar comes from the Sanskrit word tarine, which means down. So literally an avatar means one who comes down, or one who crosses down from the spiritual world to the material world. So Krishna comes, teachers come, and they come to teach the way by which we go back to the spiritual world. And as we know, Desha Kalapatra, every teacher, every avatar is giving that same knowledge, but in a way that's understandable according to time, place, and circumstance, and therefore we find variety. When people see variety in religions or variety in philosophies of the world, then they respond in different ways. Some people, they respond in a very exclusive way. They say, no, our religion is the right one and everyone else is wrong. Have you ever met anyone like that on book distribution? Maybe. This is exclusivism, the idea that I'm right, my path is right, my teacher's right, and everyone else is wrong. Obviously, that's not what we believe in.
One of those Hare Krishnas on the street once.
Yeah. Yes. And then the other extreme is pluralism. That, Prabhupada used to say, like, I think it's Ramakrishna's philosophy, yata, mata, tata, pata. Whatever your path is all the same. Everything leads to the same destination. Everything is one. It's all one. This is another extreme. So if we don't believe in exclusivism, if we don't believe in pluralism, then what do we believe in? Krishna? Definitely believe in Krishna. We could say inclusivism. These are words, but the idea is that every path, every philosophy, every sampradaya, every teaching has relevance. It takes people towards God, but within that world of different philosophies, there is gradation, there's hierarchy, and there's different levels of detail. And so this is unity in diversity. So this is our position. And how can we understand that Krishna consciousness is the most evolved? Because that's what we're saying, right? We're saying Christianity is there, Islam is there, Buddhism is there, but Krishna consciousness is the topmost. How would we be able to establish that in the world? This is also a long topic, but the most advanced theology is the most comprehensive theology. The theology which talks not only about the spiritual world, but the theology which talks about the material world. Not just about the material world, but all aspects of how to live in the material world. In other words, that theology which has the most comprehensive knowledge, you should know to be the most evolved theology. Not just that, but the theology which is relevant in all times, places, and circumstances. It's not time bound. It's not just for a particular people of a particular time. It's relevant, always relevant. It's eternal. The most advanced theology also has the most intimacy. It gives you the most close and heartfelt and personal relationship with God. The most evolved theology is also the most beautiful theology. Look at the poetry, look at the art, look at the culture within that theology. And the most beautiful theology is generally also the most evolved theology. And accessibility, the theology which anyone can access, which anyone can practice, which opens its doors to people of all levels of consciousness, you should understand to be the most evolved theology. So if anyone ever asks us, well, why do you say Krishna consciousness is the highest? Then we can mention to them that it's not a sectarian point, but on these universal principles by which you establish what is advanced theology, if you look as a neutral observer, then Krishna consciousness, the philosophy of the Bhagavatam, supersedes all other revelations of divinity. Yeah. Before I go on, does anyone have any question on this? Can I go on? Okay. All right, good. Okay, so every single philosophy in the world, every single sampradaya, they have to outline three truths. This is known as tattva traya. Tattva means truth and traya means three. Anyone want to have a guess? What are the three truths that you think any philosophy has to explain? You've been in this before, you're not allowed to answer. He's done it in London with me. You also have done it. Okay, go on.
I mean, not sure. No, okay, so I think just who is God?
Okay, who is God? One. You got one.
Okay.
Anyone else?
What is material nature?
What is the material world? Okay, good. We're on a roll here. Namacharya. The 3 in a row, don't blow it.
Who I am.
The soul, excellent, got it. Brilliant. Every single philosophy in the world has to explain these 3 things. What is Brahman? What is the Supreme? Who is the Supreme? What is the nature of the Supreme? Every philosophy has to explain what is the Jiva, or who is the soul, who are we, and what is this material world. And not only does every philosophy establish what these 3 things are, but they establish what is the relationship between these 3 things. Yeah. So in the purport, Prabhupada mentioned about Advaitavad, Dvaitavad, Achintya Bheda, Bheda Tattvavad. So all of these philosophies explain these 3 things, but they also explain the interrelationship between these 3 things. And because their explanations of these 3 things and their relationships are different, therefore they become different philosophies. Okay? But every single philosophy also answers 2 very important questions. Can anyone guess what those questions may be? Every sampradaya, every philosophy has to give an answer to 2 very important questions.
Is God personal or impersonal?
No, that would come in this. Brahman, Supreme, so that question is covered there. Yes? Okay, that's there, but not in this context, yeah.
What is the goal of life?
Closer?
What is the ultimate
This
truth?
closer, but not quite, yes.
What happens after that?
Okay, that's kind of covered here with the jiva soul, like what's going through with the soul. There's 2 important questions, yeah. Yeah, that's what Gandharvika said. That's here, that's covered here, jiva and soul. But there's 2 other questions that need to be answered.
What's the ultimate truth?
Okay, but this is Tattvatraya. This is the ultimate truth being explained here. Yeah.
What am I doing here?
Closer, closer, closer. Nearly there.
Why do I suffer?
Closer. That's even closer. Oh my God, you're really close. Yeah, Ramalila. No, that's here. Jiva soul. Okay.
What is my dharma?
Yes, bro.
What is the relationship between Jiva and Brahman?
Yeah, that's covered here. So Tattvatraya will deal with that. Okay, I'll just say it. Why is the jiva bound? Every philosophy has to be able to explain, okay, there's Brahman, Jiva, and the material world, but why are we here in the first place? How in the world did we get here? Every philosophy has to answer this. And if every philosophy answers Baddha or why is the Jiva bound, then what's the other thing the philosophy has to also explain? Without which, Mukti, what is the means of release? Okay? So when you look at whether it's Mayavad or Achintya Bheda, Bheda Tattvavad, they will cover these points. Yeah? And because they answer each of these points in different ways, that's why they're different philosophies. And so you can take every philosophy that's given and break it down like this. Okay, any questions on this before I go forward?
How
Yes.
Achintya Bheda Tattva explains about why is Jiva bound?
Okay, that's you're fast forwarding to the end, so we'll come there. We'll come there. 8:30. We'll come there, hopefully. Okay, so let's look at a little bit of history. How many years ago did Krishna appear in the world? 5,000 years. You know that. Okay, so Krishna appeared in this world. Why did Krishna appear in this world? That he explains in Bhagavad Gita. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamya. Whenever dharma goes down, whenever spirituality goes down, whenever and wherever there's a decline in religion, Tadatmanam srajamyaham. At that time I come. And what does Krishna say he does when he comes? Dharma samstapanarthaya. I establish dharma. Because dharma is the means by which to go back. Okay? I finish my little bit and then I'm gonna give you a window, yeah? So Krishna comes and he establishes dharma. Brilliant. But the day Krishna leaves is the day that what begins? Kali Yuga begins the day that Krishna leaves. And you know what the Bhagavatam says? Krishne svadham upagate dharma gnana dibi saha. The day when Krishna Svadhama goes back to his abode, what also leaves the world? Dharma and Jnana. So now that's puzzling. Because why did Krishna come to the world in the first place? To establish Dharma. But then the Bhagavatam says, the day that Krishna leaves, Dharma also leaves. So what was the point of Krishna coming? Yes. So the second line of the verse explains, Kalo nasta drisham esha purar narko dhuno dita. Although Krishna has left and Dharma and Jnana in one sense leaves with Krishna and Kali Yuga begins, it becomes very, very dark, there's still light. You can still get light because the Bhagavatam is there. And from the Bhagavatam, everything can be ascertained. So, Krishna leaves the world and then the Bhagavatam is compiled by Vyasadeva, and then the Bhagavatam is taught in the world, and the Bhagavatam becomes that which gives light to the world. But now okay, let me stop there. Okay.
Do we know when he's going to come back?
Do we know when Krishna is going to come back? Well, Krishna came back 500 years ago. That was as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Krishna is here now. Kali Kaler Nama Rupe Krishna Avatar. Krishna is here as his name. So when is Krishna going to come back? Whenever we put our hand in the bead bag. And then ultimately Krishna comes at the end of Kali Yuga as Kalki to re-establish Satya Yuga. Okay, so Krishna leaves, and after Krishna leaves, the Bhagavatam is there, so everything's okay, but the tendency is that over time things degrade. This is why you need constant education. This is why we need to have a Bhagavatam class every single morning. Because you know what would happen? Sometimes you think, what am I learning from the Bhagavatam class? I don't know, like I'm coming, I don't know how much is like. But one thing would be for sure, if you didn't come to the Bhagavatam class, you would feel it. Because without education, without constant discussion, without the truths being exchanged amongst the saintly people, then things go down. So after Krishna left, things did go down. The Shastra was there, but the understanding was not necessarily there. The essence of the Shastra became lost and there was a decline in the tradition. The Shastra became misused, misinterpreted, misapplied, and people were reading Shastra, but they weren't understanding what is the ultimate goal of Shastra. And it's mentioned that one of the biggest things that was going on is that Shastra was being misused for activities which were actually creating more entanglement for the living entities. The Shastra is supposed to free you, isn't it? Shastra, Bhagavatam is known as Grantha. Yeah? Anyone know this word Grantha? What does Grantha mean? Does anyone know? It means book, but what does it mean like etymologically? Grantha comes from the Sanskrit word Granthi. Can you think of a Bhagavatam verse which has Granthi in it? Vidyate Ridaya Granthis Chidyante Sharva Shamshaya Kshiyante Chashakarmani Drishta Evat Manishvare. Bhagavatam says when you read and you study and you get purified, then the knots within the heart become pierced. So granthi means a knot, and grantha means that which frees you, frees the knot, opens up the knot. So Shastra is meant to free you from all your attachments. But now people were misusing the Shastra and they were doing activities based on the Shastra that were making them more entangled. So that's a problem, because Krishna comes to release, but people are now using that Shastra and becoming entangled. And one of the main ways in which they were becoming more entangled is through violence to animals. Yeah, because in the Shastra there is some license to perform sacrifices, but these licenses were being misused and people were killing animals, committing violence to animals whole scale, and doing it on the basis of Shastra. This was leading to a great degradation. So therefore, after Krishna left, 2,500 years after, Krishna appeared again. Keshava Dhrita Buddha Sharira Jaya Jagadisha Hare. Krishna came again as Buddha. Buddha basically taught two things. The first and most fundamental principle he taught was ahimsa, or the principle of non-violence. Because without non-violence, without that kind of mentality, there's no way for spiritual knowledge to blossom. But in order to establish his philosophy of ahimsa, his philosophy which morally brought people to a higher standard, what the Buddha did is he taught Nashtik philosophy. Ashtik philosophy means philosophy in which you believe in God. Nashtik philosophy means philosophy in which God is either denied or God is not talked about, God is sidelined. So Krishna is amazing. Krishna comes to this world to teach a philosophy in which he doesn't even factor in that philosophy. Why did he do that? Why did he preach a philosophy of no God? Because that was what was required. First, he had to establish moral principles, and in order to establish moral principles, he had to deny Shastra. So he came, he taught the philosophy of Nirvan, no God, no variegatedness, forget the Vedas, just be a good person. You see, like sometimes, maybe I've experienced here in New Mayapur, is like, if a building becomes very, very broken, very dilapidated, to fix the building may cost you like €500,000. But sometimes what's cheaper is to do what?
Knock it down.
Demolish the whole building. Just demolish the whole building and just build something new.
Are you making a suggestion?
No comment. So Krishna was like that. He saw the situation in the world. He said, okay, let's just start again from the beginning. Reject the Vedas, reject God, everything. Let's just get people being moral again. And that's why the Buddha came.
But he is God.
But he is God, yeah. So in that way, Buddha actually tricked people, because they didn't accept the God, but they accepted him. And he is ultimately God. So then what happens after the Buddha comes is that many other teachers come in that time. There are alvars who are preaching, but they don't become very, very prominent. The alvars are actually Vaishnava saints. There's 12 of them who are in South India. They are part of the Ramanuja's Sampradaya, but that we'll talk about later on. But they are preaching, but not so influential. Buddhism becomes influential because one emperor spreads Buddhism everywhere across India. Who's that emperor? Ashoka. Ashoka just spreads Buddhism everywhere. So Buddhism is just pervading everywhere in India. Yeah. All over, everywhere. It's inconceivable like how much influence Buddhism had. So now Krishna was thinking, okay, how do we now bring it back to the pure teachings of the Bhagavatam? So now we have to start building this house again. So what is mentioned in the Padma Purana, Lord Shiva says to Parvati, Mayavadam asachastram prachanam bodhamuchyate Mayeva nihitam devi kalo brahmana murtina. Lord Shiva says to his wife, Kalo Brahmana Murtina, in Kali Yuga I will come to the world as a Brahmana. And what will I teach? Prachanam Bodha Muchyate. It's like a covered Buddhism. So I'll take Buddhism, but I'll kind of cover it and take it to a higher level. And what was that philosophy that then Lord Shiva came to teach the world? As Shankaracharya, he taught Mayavad. Mayavad. This is known as Keval Advaita, pure monism. He taught that, Buddhists, they weren't talking about God, so he didn't get into the concept of God. But what he did do is he established the Shastra, he established the Vedas. That was his contribution. He didn't really talk about Krishna. In fact, he denied Krishna. But what he did do is he actually established that the Vedas are valuable. The Vedas are authority. Shastra yonitvat. If you want to understand reality, you have to go through the Shastra. So Shankaracharya was very influential. He took sannyas at the age of 8. You know the story of how he took sannyas? He asked his mother, can I take sannyas? Can you imagine, 8-year-old child? He's asked his mother, can I take sannyas? So his mother said, no, you cannot. You must be with me naturally, as a mother would do. And then one day he was by the river, and he was in the river, and he got caught by a crocodile. So the crocodile caught hold of Shankaracharya, and he was like wrestling with this crocodile, and he was losing. It was like, Gajendra Leela all over again. And then his mother was on the bank, and she saw what was happening. And so Shankaracharya shouted to her, and he said, I'm about to die, but mother, there's one way in which I can be saved. If there is a person in a dying condition, and they vow to take sannyas, then the Lord releases them at that very moment and frees them. So he looked at his mother wrestling, and he was wrestling with it. So he said, do I have permission? Do I have your permission to take sannyas? So it was like either a dead son or a sannyasi son. So better, as they say in English, better a blind uncle than no uncle. Better to have him. So she said, yes, you can take sannyas. So he was there wrestling with the crocodile. He put his hands up and he said, Sannyaso hum. I take sannyas. That was like the most simple sannyas initiation ever. Sannyaso hum. And then mystically the crocodile just disappeared and he was released. So much?
Yes, he was took from a crocodile.
Took from a crocodile. So Shankaracharya took sannyasa at 8 years old, and then for the next 8 years he was studying, and then it said at 16 he began traveling. And what Shankaracharya did is he went to the 4 corners of India. So in India there's a concept of Char Dham, 4 holy places. In the east of India, you know what the holy place is? East of India, Jagannath Puri. I'm just getting back. Yeah, east. In the south of India, what's the holy place? Rameshwaram. In the west of India, what's the holy place? Dwarka. And in the north of India? Badrinath. Yeah, Badrikashram. That's why you find in Shankaracharya Sampradaya, they have mats in all. He did the whole of India. He circled the whole of India. And his influence became more. So this is Keval Advaitavad. So he denied. Buddha said there's no God. Shankaracharya said there's God, but he denied the difference between us and God. So you can see what's happening here. Okay. So this is around 700 AD, like that. And then the next chain in the advancement of the theology came where Ramanuja Acharya came. Remember previously I talked about the Alvars. The Alvars were preaching even before Shankaracharya. They were Vaishnavas. They were dedicated to Vishnu. They wrote many verses called Prabandham. These are like Tamil songs. It's kind of like Saranagati of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. They just taught about surrender in the Tamil language. But the culmination of the Alvars was Ramanujacharya. Ramanujacharya came in about the 11th century, like that, and he taught a philosophy called Vishishta Advaita. Vishishta Advaita. What does Vishishta Advaita mean? Vishishta Advaita means qualified monism. Okay? It's a little technical. Shankaracharya preached Kevala Advaita, which means pure monism. Ramanuja, he taught Vishishta Advaita, which is qualified monism. Okay, so if you remember that diagram of the Tattvatraya, yeah. So what did Shankaracharya teach? Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jiva Brahmeva Naparaha. Okay, so what's Shankaracharya's understanding of that Tattvatraya? Brahma Satyam, Brahman is real. Jagan Mithya, the material world, that's false. Brahmeva, Jiva, Brahmeva, Naparaha. And the Jiva and Brahman, they're non-different. So this is how Shankaracharya explains the Tattvatraya. Brahman is real, the material world is false, and the Jiva is ultimately not different from Brahman. Then why is the Jiva even here? He gave a theory of Maya. He said when the Brahman becomes covered by Maya, then there seems to be Jiva, but actually the Jiva and the Brahman are actually non-different. So he denied. So what did Ramanujacharya do? He preached qualified monism. So he said Shankaracharya is talking about monism, oneness. He's right. It's one. It is one. But he qualified what that oneness is. He says the oneness between these three things is not a oneness of identity, but it's a oneness of purpose. It's a oneness of desire. In other words, the Jiva, the material world, and the Brahman, the Supreme Lord, Ramanuja says, they are all one in the sense that their purposes are all integrated. They function perfectly together. But they're not one in the sense of the same identity. Does that make sense? So that's why it's qualified oneness, qualified monism. So do you see what he did? He took Shankaracharya's teachings and he took everyone who believed in oneness, but what he did is he elevated their understanding by explaining that within that oneness there is distinction, there is variegatedness. Does that make sense? Any questions on this?
What happened to Buddhism?
What happened to Buddhism? Buddhism was still there, as we see, Buddhism is still there now, but just the influence was not so. With generations, less and less people practiced it. With generations, it had less and less of an influence on society. It just.
Sometimes it's said he drove it out of India.
Prabhupada said that
Yeah.
Buddhism was driven out by Shankaracharya's
Yeah.
teaching.
Yeah.
Went to other places, I mean, in different diverse ways.
Yeah.
Nepal and Thailand.
Other places, yeah.
Eastern Asia.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was driven out, and practically in India there may have been some remnants of Buddha, but not very influential at all, not so prominent.
But it was predominant in one religion in India at one time.
At the time of Ashoka, yeah.
Once they were heavily destroyed, it looks like some king really expelled them militarily.
The Buddhists?
Yeah, I don't know when, because the place where Buddha appeared was completely as if.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, generally we find like Shankaracharya was obviously teaching a philosophy, and the philosophy was um, defeating Buddhism. But along with the philosophy, there's also a practical arrangement in society to also drive them out as well. So there's likely, yeah, definitely, there must have been some practical system as well.
It's like a lot of these, whatever you want to call, religious movements or philosophical movements have a lot of, say, not violence exactly, but a lot of, executive force. Christianity was spread this way, Islam spread this way, Buddhism spread this way, and they were saying the philosophy of Shankaracharya was that way, and they were saying even Ramanuja, there was, to a certain extent, a lot of it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't just philosophy.
It wasn't just philosophy, yeah. That's why in Varnashram we have like Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, and the Kshatriyas are guided by the Brahmanas, and then the Kshatriyas actually carry out what needs to be done, because they're the ones that are actually like the movers and shakers. They can really change the world, the politicians. So, yeah, you see like even the Goswamis of Vrindavan, they were like the gurus of the kings of Jaipur, for example, Man Singh, Jai Singh. These were the most powerful kings in India. That's why many of the deities in Vrindavan were moved to Jaipur, because even though the Mughals were invading, they couldn't get anywhere in Jaipur because the kings there were too powerful. Rajput, too powerful. So yeah, you find this political regime and spiritual go. Yes.
Just to make sure I got it. So Buddhism, no Vedas, no God, doesn't matter. Then Sankaracharya, yes, the Vedas, but
Not talking about a personal God, but introducing concept of the Brahman, but by in a very digestible way, by saying Brahme Jiva Brahmeva na paraha. Yes, there's Brahman, but you are that Brahman.
yes, okay.
There's
So it's
like
like saying the Atman is Brahman.
exactly.
So like I'm God.
Yeah, Tattvam Asi, you are that, you are of the same substance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think
Okay, so Ramanujacharya, then what he did is he said, he agreed with, you can see what they're basically doing is they're taking what the last person said and saying like, yeah, it's good, but know this as well. So you understand what Shankaracharya, how he connected to Buddhism. So how Ramanuja connected to Shankaracharya is Shankaracharya's whole thing was oneness, Advaita, no duality. So he said, yes, oneness is good. You're right. It's all one. But it's not a oneness of identity. It's not that everything is one in identity. Everything is one in purpose. In other words, Brahman, Jagat, and Jiva, they all combine perfectly as one. Like sometimes Srila Prabhupada writes in his books that the Lord and the devotee are one in desire. Yeah. So it's that kind of, so he qualified the oneness. He said, yes, there is oneness, but exactly what that oneness is, it has to be understood what that oneness is. So, yeah. So he detected that, yes, there's a difference between the Brahman and Jiva, but they're one in desire, but they're different in identity.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's not what we're saying here.
Yeah. So Shankaracharya was saying they're one. Ramanuja said they're one in desire, but in identity they're different. Yeah?
So in France, Buddhism is very much popular. So does it mean that to reach the point of preaching a Chintya Veda Tattva, we have to go through introduce?
We'll come to that. We'll come to that in a second. Yeah.
What would you suggest when we meet persons who say I'm a Buddhist, how to get them interested in Prabhupada books?
see, you can see there's a, can you see the thread of how they're teaching here? Whenever you meet someone, instead of saying, you're wrong, you're in Maya, get with the program, here's the book. What we rather say is that, oh, Buddhism, that's amazing. You believe in karma, you believe in reincarnation, you believe we have to be non-violent. There's so much we have in common. Build relationship, applaud them for what they do, and then plant a seed in them that, you know what, there could also be extra information to build upon your understanding already. So generally, whenever we're preaching, rather than trying to defeat people, of course, Prabhupada did also do that sometimes, but a lot of the time what we can do is work with the good things that people are doing and then build on that to take them further. So if I meet a Buddhist, I say, brilliant, like, yeah, we believe in many similar things and build relationship, explain, but then say, but there could be further extra to add to your understanding.
And then they ask what? Because sometimes they say, yeah, I have this only my religion, so what else do you have to offer me? So we have to give something. So what would you?
It's hard to say, like, it would very much depend on the person, how much they're open, what kind of interaction you have. But there are many things you can say that, one of the things you can explain is that Buddhism mainly talks about getting rid of suffering. So Prabhupada says it brings you from negative to zero. But what personalism does, it takes you from zero to the positive. So this is one of the key things that we try to share with people from the Buddhist background, that your teaching is very good because it's taking you away from suffering, but there is also a positive spiritual experience, and how you word that and present that to them, that you have to see. That's usually a better way than necessarily going in talking about God immediately, because that may be too far for them. But you can begin talking to them about positive spiritual variegatedness and happiness.
You mentioned the theory of illusion by Sankaracharya, and it says that Brahman is covered. So this world is Brahman, but it is covered. But how does Brahman get covered? Is God. How does God get under illusion?
Yeah, these are these are the points that Prabhupada would make, and when you go into and read it, it's all done mainly through word jugglery. So I don't even know that I could even present their position here, but it's all basically done through word jugglery to kind of just, in some kind of speculative way, talk about how this is just a Leela. So yeah. Do you want to say something about it?
No. You say it like that, it's Leela.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That keeps itself also, it is all one.
Yeah.
No question of Leela, everything is one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is the Leela.
So after Ramanuja, he established Vishishtadvaita, which means qualified monism. Then the next person that came, of course there are extra in between this, but I'm just talking about the main ones. The next main personality that came is Madhvacharya. So whenever you see a picture of Madhvacharya, he's always like this. And this too means Dvaitavad. Prabhupada writes in the purport here of Dvaitavad. And what he did is Ramanuja and Madhvacharya were different in how they established personalism. Ramanuja, he didn't go direct against Shankaracharya. He said, no, he's speaking many good things, but this is how we qualify it. Whereas Madhvacharya, he just goes direct against Shankaracharya, attacking. And he preaches something called pure dualism, Shuddha Dvaita. And he says everything is separate, everything is individual. So he says there are 5 differences which need to be emphasized. There are differences between every soul. Every soul is individual. There is difference between the soul and Brahman. There is a difference between the soul and the material world. There is a difference between the material world and Brahman, and there is a difference between individual things within the material world, everything is different. So he was like disgusted with Shankaracharya's oneness. So he just went to the other extreme and said everything is separate, everything is dual, everything is individual. And in this way, Madhvacharya has the best arguments against Shankaracharya. He's the one that really deconstructs it. And it's interesting because Madhvacharya was initially in a impersonal lineage himself. And then later on he took initiation, Vaishnavism. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes, and what he does is he harmonizes everything. So he takes teachings from all of the acharyas and he actually explains how all of them have elements of the truth. It's amazing, Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas, he even quotes some of Shankaracharya's commentary on the Vedanta Sutra to establish certain points. You think, how can you quote Shankaracharya? Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Mayavada Bhashya Shunile Hoya Sarvanash. If you hear Mayavad, everything is lost. But Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas even sometimes quotes things from Shankaracharya where it's relevant. Of course, we have to be careful, but where it's relevant, to show that each one of these things had truth in them. And then what he does is he harmonizes everything. So in essence, this is how theology evolves after Krishna leaves. So this is the summary. Krishna appears, he establishes Dharma, but then Dharma goes down. So then Buddha comes, and Buddha teaches there's no God. Be at least non-violent. Then Shankaracharya says there is God, there is Brahman, but what does he do? He denies the difference between the living entity and God. Ramanujacharya comes and he detects that there is a difference between God and the living entity. Then Madhvacharya comes and he emphasizes the difference between God and the living entity. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes and he teaches Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. He harmonizes the difference between God and the living entity. And this is why we say that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Prabhupada writes in the last line of the purport, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy is the most perfect philosophy, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu takes elements from each one of these. Yeah. So just a very quick summary now. Buddha came and his contribution was that he taught ahimsa and morality. Shankaracharya came, his contribution was that he re-established the Vedas. Ramanuja, his contribution was that he detected the difference between the individual living entity and God. Madhvacharya, his contribution was that he emphasized it, so that there would be no chance for Mayavad to come back. Madhvacharya looked at what Ramanuja did and he thought, but he's qualified oneness. There's still a chance Mayavad could come back. Therefore, Madhvacharya drew a hard line and ensured that no Mayavad could ever come again. And then Mahaprabhu, he harmonized all the differences. The reason some of these are in green is because they are the Vaishnava Sampradayas. They are Ashtik Sampradayas. And there are also others, Vishnu Swami and Nimbarka as well. These are also variations of the philosophy. And the final thing I'll say, perhaps we can talk about more tomorrow, is why is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Sampradaya considered the harmonization of all Sampradayas? Because what Mahaprabhu did is from all of the four Sampradayas, he took two principles. In other words, he took the best things from all the Sampradayas and then he harmonized it into the Gaudiya Sampradaya. So what Mahaprabhu did in the Gaudiya Sampradaya is he taught the highest tattva, because he took all the philosophies and took the essence of the philosophy. He taught the highest rasa, because he not only established the greatness of the personal form of God, but also the sweetness of God. and sadhana. He gave the highest practice, because what he did is he took all the important principles from all the sampradayas and he made that a part of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. And this is why Prabhupada says Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teaching is the most perfect teaching, because in Tattva is the highest, in Rasa is the highest, and in Sadhana is the highest. So that's okay. That's a little summary. I'm sure there's much more to say on this. Yes, Maharaj.
Why is it then, after you explained nicely about Ramanujacharya, Shankaracharya, Lord Chaitanya, especially Madhvacharya, who you did mention drove out Mayavad philosophy basically and destroyed. Why is it that that still seems to be, really speaking, the most prominent philosophy, not only in India, but throughout the world?
Mayavad?
Yeah, the impersonalist mentality, even amongst so-called Vaishnavas, impersonalism is still very much ingrained in almost imperceptibly in their existence.
Yeah, it's a very good question, man.
Mundane impersonal idea, why you not listening to me, why you didn't say hello to me. That's not, but the underlying illusion of thinking I am in the center and I am the enjoyer and I am the controller and I am God, basically. It's very prominent. The label of being a Vaishnava, the label of being a Christian, etc. But mostly is Mayavad.
Yeah, yeah.
And Prabhupada's pranam mantra, Vinishesha Shunyavadi, is coming specifically to drive out this impersonalism because it's rampant all over the East and West. One other point you said about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, taken from different sampradaya. He said it's simultaneously one and different. So he includes the oneness.
Yes.
And he stresses the difference there also.
Yeah.
Whereas he just stressed the difference.
Exactly. He stressed the difference, yeah.
So why is this influence so strong? If all this, arrangement being made here, it doesn't look like it worked.
There's a saying, still waters run deep.
Well, I would say a few things on that. I would say a few things on that, Maharaj. I would say, and others can contribute to this. The first thing is, I would say that most people in the world who are practicing impersonalism are not really practicing Mayavad like what Shankaracharya taught. It's almost just like a airy-fairy kind of everything is one, love, unity, and peace, and it's not really like what Shankaracharya taught. Like, it's more just a kind of wishy-washy kind of thing. Yeah, like the living entity comes to this world to be a controller and enjoyer. So that's the basic mentality, that everyone wants to be a controller and enjoyer. So it's interesting that through Mayavad, it's actually like you become the controller and enjoyer in a spiritual way. I'll explain what I mean. Like, God is here and the living entity is here, is a servant of God, as we know. So what atheism does is it brings God down. Atheists say, no, there's no one up there, everyone's just a living entity. So it brings God down. And then it removes the distinction between God and the living entity, and that means the living entity can enjoy and control, try. What Mayavad does, or impersonalism of any kind, it says it doesn't take God down, but what it does is it takes the living entity up. But the net result of it is whether you're here or you're here, what you've done through both of these philosophies is you've basically removed the distinction between God and the living entity, and therefore you've opened up the opportunity for yourself to be the controller and enjoyer. So therefore,
prominent thing, both materially and spiritually.
But that's impossible.
Yeah. But my point is that therefore you'll find that impersonalism is not necessarily the impersonalism of Shankaracharya, but it's more the impersonalism of not wanting to surrender to a personal God so you can be a controller and enjoyer still and be spiritual.
Very strong.
Yeah, and it's very strong.
Prabhupada was in New York in '66. He was preaching so strong against Mayavad philosophy.
Yeah.
In '66, with boys and girls who were just hippies, basically.
Yeah.
He was preaching against Mayavad. And then one day, one of them, Mahapadi or someone was Buddhist, he said, "Why are you all preaching against this Mayavadi? Why is the Swami always preaching against this Mayavadi?" Why are you always preaching against it? Is it some kind of, you had an issue with some group in India called Mayavadis? You can't get out of your mind, you get somebody who gets on your nerves, and you keep trying to put them down all the time, put ISKCON down or put somebody down, got some issue with it. Swami's got some issue with these, whoever they are, these Mayavadis in India or whoever they are. He said, "Well, Swamiji, why are you preaching always against Mayavadi?" He said, "Because you're a Mayavadi."
No.
That's what he said. You're all Mayavadis. Not real, as you say, not really Mayavadis, but still embracing
way
the
of thinking.
principle of Maya. I am the enjoyer. I am in the center. Krishna consciousness is here to satisfy me. This is impersonalism. What has ISKCON done to me? This is Mayavad philosophy underlying it. It's contrary to our very principle of Lord Chaitanya Sankirtan. But it still pervades us, seeing ourselves, I have to have it my way. This thing, that thing.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to root it out.
Yeah. Yeah, to become a servant, that's the essence of personalism.
I did it my way. Remember that song?
It's 9:15. It's late, and I'm sure we need to.
One question.
You have 101 questions.
Are you going to continue tomorrow?
Yeah, but maybe we can continue tomorrow. Is that okay?
Write your questions down.
Yeah.
Write it down.
Because otherwise we'll hold everyone. Because it will be an extended discussion. Because I'm sure it will be a very good question. Is that okay? Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Thank you everyone very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.
His grace, Sutapa ki.